Thank you guys for checking out the stream and the PBR Smasher tier list. We're going to be going over Apex Legends weapons tier list today for beginner players in Season 12. This list is going to be for probably geared towards a 3v3 mode, just for playing either ranked or socials. And if you're just following along for the first time, thanks, I appreciate it. We're going to start in order and just kind of go down the list with all the weapons. Starting with the 30-30. So this is a heavy ammo weapon. And this is where I'm actually going to be putting... I think we first need to rename these tiers. I think we're going to do an early game tier instead of just putting a D tier. I wouldn't say any weapon in the game is necessarily D tier, just depending on the early game. This 30-30, we're going to start out the list with a C tier. I think they kind of ranked these in order of like which ones they must not have thought were that good apparently. But the 30-30 is solid. It cranks out decent damage. It has two different attachments. So I would say it just kind of comes down to being a preferential weapon. I think there's better weapons out there. The triple take probably has a hair of a slower fire rate, but it can be used more of a shotgun close range. The 30-30 has came a long ways, but I think we're going to kind of leave that C tier. We don't have too much to talk about that. Next up is the Alternator Smg. Really popular at the beginning of the season. I think people are starting to find out it's not as good of a weapon as what they thought it might be. It just doesn't have the melt power that some of the other weapons do. So I would say early game, if you get this, it's a good early game weapon. Otherwise, we're going to drop it down to C tier. I think it's one of the lowest rated SMGs. As a beginner, this is one of the ones that I tend to use a lot actually. So I actually like using the alternator, but it doesn't one clip people like some of the other ones can, especially towards the end game. This is not the kind of gun I'd be wanting to go into the end game with, even as a secondary. Next up we have AK's bow. I know AK is a fan of the bow check. I guess the bow check was created by one of the game designers, and then they named it after him. I'm going to throw this below the 30-30 and below the alternator. As a weapon of funness, I would say it's the S tier funnest weapon in the game. Besides the Sheila or the Kraber. The Sheila's Rampart's turret. But I would say the bow kind of drops down below the alternator in the 30-30 just based on utility. So the 30-30 is going to have a better close range capability to kill people than the bow check would. And that's kind of why I think the 30-30 excels a little bit over the bow. The alternator is probably going to be right. I mean, these are like neck and neck right now as far as where I'd put them on the list, so we'll kind of just leave it at where it is and kind of keep going. The bow check is a really fun weapon to be used in that mode that they had, 9v9 control. If they bring more modes into the game, I think the bow could be super useful. If they kind of went, let's say for example they made a route to do more team deathmatch or domination or something like that, and you want something more stealthy in a big battle, the bow is a very solid secondary weapon, and it does really good damage. So I think it's easy to use, it's easy to land shots with. I'd put it at the bottom of this list, but it's not terrible. Like if you're good with the bow, you'll be just fine. Car SMG, people that can manage the recoil on this gun usually are probably some of the best in the game at gunplay. If you can't manage the recoil, this is going to be a B or a C tier for you. But if you're able to manage the recoil, we're going to put this up at A tier. One of the best additions to the Season 12. I don't grab it too often, but to justify some of its capabilities, you can use either heavy or light ammo, heavy or light magazines, which is crazy because let's say something's in the replicator and you don't have time to get to a replicator. There's usually a lot of, like, let's say for example, purple heavy mags laying around. So throwing one of those on there and just having a bunch of light ammo is nice. And then if you like maining a gun like the R301, you can always drop it later. Or let's say, for example, you want to pick up a Rampage later game to have some more range. The car is like the perfect weapon for a lot of different situations. So we're going to leave that at A tier. Next up, we're going to go with the charge rifle. Sleeper of a gun. This thing destroys shields. It's super annoying to get shot by. The magazine size holds this gun back. We are going to put the charge rifle for this season. Oh, it's such a fun weapon. I think we're going to put it at B tier. The top of B tier, at least for now. We'll see what happens, but it's a really good weapon. Devotion came down a tier for me. I used to think it was pretty cracked last season with the turbocharger. Now I'm kind of up in the air. I think I'd rather have a Havoc. We're going to put the Devotion. Oof, this is tough. Would you guys rather have a turbocharged Devotion or a 30-30? We can't think of this gun like it already has a turbocharger on it. So I think that's why we have to bring it down. If it came with the turbocharger, it'd be a great weapon. Well, probably be in the B tier. Since it doesn't come turbocharged, we're gonna drop it at C. Moving on, the EVA 8 shotgun. This is gonna be at the bottom of our B tier for now. It just can't compete with the other shotguns. It's kind of just a gun made for people that, I don't know, maybe they're not as good at using shotguns, Maybe they're like me. I'm not that good at using shotguns. Early game, it's a great gun. Flatline. This one is tough for me. I'm not huge on the flatline actually, but I know it does good damage. I'm just one of those guys that can't control it. So I think we're going to put this probably at the tip top of B tier. If you fully kit it, it obviously is going to go up to A tier. We're not playing each weapon though. We're not ranking each weapon like it's already fully kitted. So I'm going to kind of leave it. Let's say we're kind of ranking it as if these weapons have like a common man's attachments, like a light mag, a common light mag, or a medium light mag. Obviously, I know when we talked about the car, I don't want to sound hypocritical because I talked about the utility. That's just kind of a different circumstance than what we're talking about with just a bare bones flatline. It's very hard for a lot of players to control. And if we're talking about beginners' weapons, this just isn't going to be the kind of gun you're going to want to like start out with. Which I should almost bring the EVA 8 up further since we're talking about beginners' weapons, but this weapon's really hard to control too, but it has a pretty reasonable hipfire capability. So if you guys are familiar with other first-person shooters, obviously the hip firing in this game isn't going to be too hard to get used to. Next, we're going to go with the supply drop G7 Scout. So the G7's in the supply drop for Season 12. We can't put this any lower than A tier just because of what it is. I mean, it's probably the best marksman weapon in the game. It's obviously going to be better than 30-30. It's debatably better than a gold triple take if you have a gold triple take. Kind of comes down to preference and comfortability with the gun after that. Next up, we're going to go with the Havoc. I think this season, the Havoc is going to probably rank at the bottom of A tier. If you find a gold one laying on the ground, which is very common this season, You don't really find, I know we talked about flatlines not having attachments. You don't really find gold flatlines laying around all over. If you land a Fight Night on Olympus, you're going to find a gold Havoc half the time, I feel like. It's pretty common that it drops like that. If you're a beginner and you have this, it's a very solid weapon up close and a very solid weapon at mid range with the turbocharger. Without the turbocharger, it drops. If you are bare bonesing both of these guns, it's hard because there's just such a high probability of, not a high probability, but it's just like so likely to fully kit this out this season compared to what it used to be, I feel like. The flatline for most players, especially if you're on PC, is going to go up above the Havoc. So we're going to put the Havoc at the bottom of the A tier. Hemlock. This is a gun that if you go into the firing range and practice, you're going to be super dominant with. Early season, I think we're going to put it kind of right in the middle of the B tier. It's got a little bit of capability to fire at mid-range and long range. It's got a little bit of a capability to battle up close. It's just, you're kind of limiting yourself for what you're going to have for a secondary weapon if you pick the Hemlock. Like, if you're picking the Hemlock, you're going to have to run something close range probably to compensate. So we're going to put that at B tier. This is a weapon that I would really recommend getting used to, just so you can benefit from it. A lot of players don't practice with this weapon very much, and it isn't very good for them, but if you practice with it, it does a lot of damage, and it's relatively easy. You kind of have to aim for the person's neck, and the gun bounces up into their head. So it's a good weapon. Has a nice recoil pattern. Kraber. I think we're going to put this in S tier. This gun changes games. If you got 3 squads left at the end, or 2 squads left, or you're mismatched, let's say you're the only person left on your squad alive, and there's 2 or 3 players on the other squad, this is a gun you're going to need to be able to knock people down and cause chaos. You should look to use the Kraber to pin people against the storm, if possible. You should use it to bait people if they're trying to heal. Let's say you knock someone, you should wait and bait before you finish them off some of the time, because this thing has massive capabilities. 145 damage standard to the head. It's knock. I mean, there's just no weapon in the game that's going to do that for you. L-Stars came down a notch this season. We're going to take this all the way to the bottom of B tier. Actually, this is tough. If you're using a Rampart or someone, the L-Star is pretty solid. Very solid early game. One of the best early game weapons. If I was getting into an early game battle, I think I'd want the L-Star. This is probably going to be, oh man, very debatable. I put the EVA 8 and the L-Star side by side. I think they're both equally good weapons for the situation. If you're playing early game and you prefer having an automatic weapon, then pick the L-Star. If you're playing early game and you prefer having a shotgun, then I would say pick the EVA 8. You're not going to go wrong with either of them. It just kind of comes down to more of a comfortability thing. Next, we're going to go with the Longbow, which is now in the Replicator this season. So last season, the Longbow would just be found on the ground. I think it does between 40 and 80 damage generally. Very solid weapon. It's the easiest sniper to use, in my opinion, in the game. If you struggle landing sniper shots, this is the gun you'd want. Fits good with a 4x8 scope. Fits good with a 2 and a 3x. It's kind of wonky with the 6X. Some people might prefer the 6X on it. I think it's a little wonky. It's a little bit wonky with the 4x10. So I would put the Longbow, just based on what it could be used for. We're going to put it right at the cusp, I would say, of the tip of B tier. You don't think the Kraber deserves an S tier, AK? Oh my gosh. Man, the Kraber slaps, man. It slaps. Gotta have the Kraber at S tier for sure. It's the best weapon. It's the best weapon in the game. It's arguable, but I think it's the best weapon. Unless you're getting pushed. If you're getting pushed, the Kraber's kind of sketchy. But I think we're going to put the Longbow right here at B tier. Because you're limiting yourself again with the secondary. The Longbow is going to have one of the more choppy battles if you're up close with people. It's more of a choppy gun. So you can't really use it like you could with a triple take. So we're going to leave it right where it's at. Next one just comes down to preference. I would say if you're new to the game, we're going to put the Mastiff at probably your tip of the iceberg B tier class. Put it right behind the flatline. I think the Mastiff's the best gun for a beginner for a shotgun. Peacekeeper's a little bit harder to use. For what it's worth, the Mastiff's really solid. Once you get the dual shell, it's debated to be the best in the game between that and the Peacekeeper with the kinetic feeder. So I think we're going to leave the Mastiff right where it's at. Mozambique, early game. I think it's the best shotgun in the game for early. Or I would say, I would say it's. I don't want to say the best shotgun in the game. I misspoke. It's the best early game weapon in the game out of what's going to be in this category. It's good for arenas. It's the meta gun in arenas. So if you get the hammer points on it, I mean it's okay, but like it is what it is, right? We're not gonna put that above anything else at the moment. P20 is gonna go below. If you like cheating at the video games, I guess the P20 is probably a little bit better. Personally, I don't cheat, but if you get into games that people are using modded controllers or something like that, then the P20 becomes a little bit better. Peacekeeper. This shotgun, for me, is going to be... this is a really tough one, guys. The Mastiff's easier to use for beginners. So I want to say if you're a beginner getting used to the game, it's just going to come down to feel. The Mastiff's going to probably edge out in feel for a new beginner. Peacekeeper's going to be more deadly for better players. A lot of times if I use the Peacekeeper, I'm not landing full damage. Where Mastiff, it's just kind of easier to aim. The recoil pattern's a little bit easier. It's just kind of going to be preference for whatever you guys enjoy. Prowler, it's going to be really close to the Hemlock. That's going to be another preferential gun. I think we're going to actually edge the Hemlock over the Prowler. For beginners, for you guys, if you haven't played Apex before, the Prowler is going to be the bottom tier weapon in the game. Like, if this is something that you've never played before, you're probably not going to want the Prowler as your top choice. If you're fairly good at managing guns and FPSs, the Prowler's going to be doing hella damage. And if you're good at PC playing with a mouse and keyboard, I think the Prowler's going to serve you pretty well. So we're actually going to edge the L-Star over the Prowler just based on user friendliness. And we're going to kind of leave it at that. Next up is the R301. We're going to drop that to the bottom of A tier. I think the R301 is probably the best well-rounded AR in the game for new users. It's the best easy recoil pattern in the game. It's, as Gaming Merchant would say, it's just diagonal down. So all you got to do is diagonal down, left, right, left is kind of the management pattern for that. I think it's a great weapon. I don't know why I would put it. I would put an R301 over a Havoc. I don't want to get crazy here. I think we're going to edge it over the G7 as well. Now it just has to come down to, do we want to put the car in front of the R301? For this season, it just really depends what you're good with. Personally, I'm better with the R301 than I am with the car, but the car is probably the best SMG in the game. I think we're going to... this is tough. We're going to edge it out here. We're going to put the R301 up higher. It's not going to have the same melting power, but it's so well-rounded. I mean, you can use it for anything. So that's where we're going to do that. Next up, the R99. We're going to put the R99 right behind the charge rifle. I think it's substandard compared to the car. I think it's a good weapon. I think if you don't have a long magazine for it, you're in trouble. So if you don't have a long magazine for this gun, you're in trouble. If you're new to the game, the recoil is going to be something that takes a little bit of time to manage. It's a little bit of a light weapon, so it bounces up pretty easily. A lot of people, though, are going to like the feel of it, so we'll leave it there. It's a good weapon, just not great. Rampage. We are going to put the Rampage. It has an ability to blow down doors, has an ability to do damage from range. I think we're going to put that right over here. Right behind the Peacekeeper and in front of the Longbow. You can run a Rampage instead of a Longbow, and it's still going to do good damage for you. So it just has a little bit more utility. So I think we put it in front of the Longbow, kind of leave it where it's at. RE45. People aren't going to like this at all. It's probably the most controversial one I have. But I love this gun. I think this gun is awesome. I think it's super easy to use. It's great for every situation. If you need to shoot people that are downed, it gives you precision. If you need to shoot people and just kind of splat and run, it's a good weapon. It's going to go up above the P20. It's going to go above the Mozambique. It's going to go above the Alternator. It's going to go above the Devotion. It's going to go all the way. I'm a psycho. I'm going to put it above the R99. People are not going to have any faith in me anymore after what I just did. I mean, it's all personal preference, right? This gun, if you're a beginner, is freaking awesome. If you're playing arenas, super solid. There's a map spot on Olympus this season where you can often get the RE45 golded out right away. So that's why I think between that and the Havoc, the ability to get them gold this season quickly, toppled by the ability to put hammer points on this, it puts it above the R99 for me, and it puts it above the Mozambique and the P20. You get to a high level, this isn't going to be as good as it is anymore. This is going to be at the bottom with the other guns. But if you're playing all the way up through Diamond, it's a great weapon. I highly recommend this as like an early to mid game secondary weapon. Eventually, if you got to trade it out for something, trade it out, but I wouldn't be trading it out for much more than, it's just an R99, probably tops. I wouldn't trade it out for an alternator. Just kind of depends what you have available. You don't need to have a stock to run it, which is nice. So, next, we have a Sentinel. This, I used to think, slaps super hard. It's more tricky to use than a lot of the other snipers. So I think we're going to put this, it's the slow fire rate. We're going to put this behind the charge rifle. I think the Sentinel doesn't do as much for an early game player as what a charge rifle could do. So I think we'll kind of place that there. It's really good for Rampart. If you play Rampart, I would recommend using the Sentinel. If you want to use like a bubble battle with Gibby, I guess the Sentinel's pretty solid. I have a tough time with this weapon because it feels good with all the scopes, but I think it's one of the only snipers that feels good with all the scopes. But the thing I struggle with is I never know if I want to have like a 2 or a 3x on this gun or if I want to have a 4x8 on it. So if you run the Sentinel and you have a larger backpack, sometimes, I apologize for those dogs barking, I'd recommend using something that you can take off. So if you have the backpack space, keep a 2 or 3x and like take it off when you need to. I'm gonna have to I'll shut my window so those dogs don't quit barking. I live next to a dog park and it's like the first nice day out this year, so people are walking their dogs outside. Anyways, let's go to the Spitfire, which isn't in the supply drop this season. So this is a tier list from season 11, so we're not going to actually see, like it doesn't actually update what's in the supply drop. The Spitfire, well, what am I saying? This is obviously in the supply drop. I mean, I was mixing up some of the stuff from earlier. I'm going to put the Spitfire above pretty much everything in B tier. I think we're going to bring it all the way up to the tip of A. I think it's a really good suppressive weapon. Generally, I'll run a Spitfire R301 or a Spitfire car. These are all kind of interchangeable with one another. They're easy to use. So if you're wanting to like carry both of them in a game, I like the Spitfire because you don't have to have any ammo. So that's going to edge it out for me and put it up in the tip of A tier. Ooh, next we have the triple take. So this one's tough because some people are going to have preference between the 30-30 and the triple take. Personally, I like the triple take way more. It's probably the easiest marksman weapon to use for beginners. So if we're going strictly off of a beginner's weapon standpoint, I'm going to bring the triple take all the way up to, I'm going to put it in front of the Rampage even. We're giving this a lot of weight. I think it's super solid because you can use it up close as a shotgun if you need to. Up close, you're going to cap 60 damage a pop. So that's a pretty solid up close range weapon. From distance, it's really precision based, so it's really good at knocking people or killing knocked opponents. It just doesn't spit as much damage as I wish it would. So that's kind of where it limits itself and just not spitting as much damage. If you find a gold one, for example in Fight Night, and you find the G7 in the care package, personally I would actually consider taking the gold triple take over the G7. It just really comes down to preference. But if you're good with the G7 is bar none the better marksman rifle probably in my opinion. But the triple take, they don't really nerf it much when they take it out of the care package. So I would leave it at a mid B tier for sure. We're really giving S tier a lot of weight this season. So obviously these weapons in most people's are probably going to be in the A tier. Like all these top guns we have They're probably going to be an A tier class on a lot of people's lists, but we're going to leave it where they're at. Volt is going to be the second weapon to go into S tier, and we're talking about the care package Volt. So if you get the supply drop Volt, this is the premier SMG in the game. This is the gun you're going to want at the end game. You're not going to be having to fight for ammo constantly. So that's kind of, you can load up on grenades. That's kind of where it comes into play of being better than all the other ones. It's really easy to use. It's got a much easier recoil pattern than a lot of these other weapons do as well. So I think we're going to leave that there. Lastly, to round everything out, we have the Wingman. We're talking about a beginner's list here. Keep in mind. So the Wingman on a professional player's list is going to be S or A tier. For us, we got to be thinking beginner level. It's really going to come down to preference. If you're really comfortable using this weapon, this is going to be an A tier weapon. If you've never played this game before and you haven't used the Wingman, it's going to take some getting used to. So I think we are going to put it, personal opinion, it's probably higher, but we're kind of thinking this is like a more of a beginner's I can't. We'll just disclaim, like, here it is. Either you know how to use it or you don't, and you're comfortable using it or you're not. We're not going to put it in a B tier. It's just not that low of a weapon. We're going to put it... Oh, man. We're going to put it in front of the G7 in the A tier slot. I think this is a really nice slot for it, just because it's really... I mean, if you get it early game, you're going to slap whoever you're going up against, most likely. You just really got to get comfortable with it and get a good magazine for it. And generally the 1X sight is the one that everyone goes for. So if you get the rectangular 1X sight, you know what I'm talking about, the field goal post 1X hog sight, that's going to be the one that you're going to be doing the best with. So I think we'll leave everything as is for now. Stay tuned for more tier lists. So thank you guys for hanging out. If you're in the stream, I'm just going to